Spoiler warning for the first 4 chapters of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door for Nintendo Switch. So, after several months of waiting, and several years of hoping and begging for it to exist, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door has received a remake for the Nintendo Switch. It's here! It exists! You can go to the store right now and buy it! It's physically in my hands and I can eat mac and cheese on top of it if I want to. To say that this is a monumental occasion in the Paper Mario fandom would be an understatement. The constant begging, the petitions, the discourse. Oh, the discourse. It's been a very long journey getting to this point. 2 whole decades if you really want to look at it that way. But now the thing that the Paper Mario fandom thought would never happen has become reality. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I've been working on a series of retrospective videos dedicated to the Paper Mario franchise. I do eventually plan on giving this remake its own dedicated time to shine as part of that series, but I've still got another game to go, and we gotta do things in order. Since the iron is hot and the algorithm is fickle, I figured I would make this first impressions video to let y'all know what I think of the game so far and compile my immediate thoughts and first impressions. So, to cut right to the chase, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, remake, rebuild, remaster, I don't like the way they named this. The 2024 version for the Switch has thus far not only met my expectations, but has exceeded them. It's not 100% perfect, and we'll get into my annoyances and nitpicks, but that aside, this game can only be described as the thing dreams are made of. Most fans would have been happy with a simple upscale, convert the game to a 16:9 aspect ratio, increase the render resolution, and touch up the assets, maybe include a couple of quality of life adjustments and call it a day. But this rebuild of the original game does so much more than we could have ever expected. For starters, the visual overhaul is just insane. The original game already looked stunning and has aged very gracefully, but this new Switch version completely overhauls everything, rebuilding the game from the ground up, while still keeping true to the spirit and visual identity of the original. The lighting and overall contrast of the colors is where the visuals really shine, on top of more detail in general. But where this rebuild really goes the extra mile is in the extra touches. I'm not just talking about UI overhauls or things added to the environments, but things like characters having additional expressions. From what I can tell so far, every major character and even a good assortment of NPCs have extra poses and sprites that were created for this remake. These, on top of the expressions already present in the game, just add that extra bit of life to the characters and make going through this story again feel fresh and dynamic. An uninitiated player will have no idea that these weren't even in the original game. And that's just the visuals. Not only does this game have a complete visual overhaul, but the soundtrack has been completely remastered. Remastered soundtracks are nothing new for remakes, but my expectations were high, and yet this remake's soundtrack still somehow found a way to eviscerate those expectations. Tracks have not only been redone from scratch, but they've also been extended, adding more depth and fitting in so seamlessly that new players will be none the wiser. But on top of that, there's also a metric ton of new music too. New renditions of existing songs, new theme songs for every party member, and even new battle themes for every chapter. And so many of these songs not only fit in perfectly with the rest of the remastered soundtrack, but they slap. They slap so insanely hard. Musical tastes and preferences are obviously very subjective, and a lot of people are kind of mixed on the new soundtrack. I personally don't think that it's better than the original 100% of the time, but I would say that 9 times out of 10, I love the updated OST and vastly prefer it. And what's great is that if you play the game and prefer the original soundtrack, there's a badge that restores it, so everybody wins. All of these aesthetic changes come alongside a myriad of little itty-bitty changes and improvements. Things like getting 5 extra item slots, a quick change feature that makes swapping your partners the slightest bit faster, getting to use extra items instead of having to juggle them around and waste time, and thankfully, a button that skips certain actions and even cutscenes, saving a few seconds here and there, which does add up when allowed for certain repetitive actions. There are also some minor tweaks to overall balancing, stuff that's really tedious to get into, so I won't. And the addition of a Toad who will let you practice your moves, and his theme song, very good. Many wondered what Nintendo would do about the backtracking, and I'm pleased to report that while it hasn't been totally eliminated, the extent has definitely been decreased somewhat. Chapters 1 and 2 have been largely unchanged, though I feel like the layout of the boggly tree has been streamlined a bit. I'm not too sure about that, I might just be misremembering things, but Chapter 3 has been made the slightest bit less tedious by being allowed to skip the sleep cutscene when Mario heals. And without getting too into spoilers, Chapter 4 has had one whole trip to and from the steeple removed. Ideally, I think I would have liked it if they had cut out one more trip, but this is, at the very least, a pretty significant improvement to the pacing. I am definitely interested to see how they make future instances of backtracking less noticeable and tedious. There are a lot of improvements and tweaks that don't really interfere with the original experience, though there are a few minor complaints that I have. The big thing everybody is talking about is the fact that the game runs at 30 frames per second instead of 60. Something that feels especially egregious when the original version, that was made for much weaker hardware, was able to run at 60, while looking really good for its time and honestly still holding up by today's standards. Yeah, that's pretty disappointing, but I view it as less of an issue with the game itself and the developers who made it, and more of an issue with Nintendo making a console that's far too underpowered for this current gaming landscape. We could have had 60 FPS, but the scope and ambition of the visuals wouldn't be as nice as it is. And honestly, I prefer the route that they took here. At the very least, the frame rate is stable, and the visual glow-up is glorious. The game is still 100% playable even at half the frame rate, and this is the same frame rate that every game after Super Paper Mario has run at, so it doesn't feel especially out of the ordinary in that context. If anything, these visuals just future-proof the game so that if and when it does drop on the Switch 2, we'll very likely get an upgrade that allows the game to run at 60 FPS at a higher resolution. And then at that point, you get the best of both worlds. You just have to wait a little bit for it. Another complaint is that battles don't feel quite as snappy as they did before, due to some instances of the game holding on things for longer than it used to originally. It didn't bother me too much, but I definitely saw some people complaining about this online. Load times between areas are also slightly longer than they were in the original, but only by about a second or two in most cases. I would also say it's kind of a missed opportunity that we don't have any more substantial new content, like a side mode where we get to see what Luigi has been up to. But I hear that there are new boss fights sprinkled into the game, so there is new content, and I'm excited to see the full extent of what it is. The last thing I want to touch on is the localization. Certain bits of dialogue were tweaked, but overall the script seems to be more loyal to the Japanese version of the game. And in the lead up, a lot of us, especially a lot of viewers in my audience, were wondering if they would finally uncensor Vivian being trans. A lot of people, myself included, kind of just assumed that Nintendo of America wouldn't even bother. Because if someone even sneezes a sneeze that vaguely sounds like the word gender, weirdos on the internet who were never even going to play the game to begin with start losing their shit. And I assumed that Nintendo just wouldn't want to deal with that controversy. But before the game even came out, we got all the confirmation that we needed. And I am so relieved and happy to say that they not only updated their language in the Japanese version to be less transphobic, but they also kept Trans Vivian in the official English release. The sheer amount of love, celebration, fan art, and just pure joy that fans of this purple ghost are feeling is truly contagious. And no amount of weirdos on the internet trying to be a phobe or saying that she's actually a femboy according to some Japanese context that you don't understand will take away from the fact that this is always who this character was. And now a new generation of trans people will have positive, canon, confirmed representation in a game starring the biggest icon in all of gaming. I'm really excited to see how the rest of the story plays out in this remake. Overall, I'm very pleased with The Thousand Year Door for Nintendo Switch, and I'm urging anyone and everyone, please buy the game. The game is just as good as the original, and honestly, thus far is my preferred way to play it. If 30 frames per second is the only reason you haven't bought it, I mean, fine, that's your prerogative, but I think that's a silly reason to not buy a game that's otherwise insanely good, especially when the fanbase has been begging for it and the very success of this game will kind of determine the future of the franchise. The remake is helping me gain a new appreciation for The Thousand Year Door and has managed to keep things fresh. A lot of new people have been getting into the game and loving it. And if the game sells well, that will likely solidify a future for the series that hardcore fans will be far more pleased with. Future games can finally stop being divisive and make a larger quantity of people happy. I think that sounds like a pretty good prospect. If you're one of those people who's been complaining about the new direction that the Paper Mario series has taken, it's time to speak with your wallet. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I'm having a blast replaying it, I can't wait to finish it, and I hope that you're all enjoying it just as much as I am. I also want to give a special thanks to my Platinum tier patrons, Psyche Clips, Starman Omega, and Third Watcher. Thank you all for the support. It's meant a lot to me as I've been figuring out and navigating a lot of things. I'll see you all in the next video.